There we go. Welcome to a special edition of our last Friday phone call hosted by K-State Research and Extension. When Steve Radley from Network Kansas approached me with the idea of using our First Friday network to identify projects to bring new resources to Kansas, he unknowingly pushed all of my Gallup strengths buttons. Connectedness, positivity, responsibility, belief, and futuristic. Steve said that Kansas is number 49 of 50 states in utilizing this federal asset, and he waited for someone to step forward and take the reins, but when that didn't happen, Network Kansas and its board decided to be the ones. You'll hear stories of how this money has already been used to change the trajectories of projects and communities, and perhaps you're here because you have a dream or you want to dream about what's possible for your community. Perhaps you already know the power of connection and you're here to have your hopes revived. Whoever you are, we thank you for coming and bringing others with you to learn more. For those of you that are usually on our First Friday call, I want to emphasize that this does not take the place of anything. We'll have another one next Friday, and I'll tell you that at the end of the talk. So our speaker today is Vukas with the Sunflower Development Group, and Steve Radley from Network Kansas will supplement as necessary. And Chris, take it away.
Great. I appreciate being here today, and I'm really excited to share about a really interesting partnership between Network Kansas and Sunflower Community Investments. I'll give a super brief background. My background is new market tax credits, largely in community development. I've been involved in the program for about 10 years as a awardee of new market tax credits for a rural community development entity that worked in Indian country with Native American groups. Also, I moved on from there and was deputy director of Greater Kansas City LISC, which is a nonprofit lender who lends to not only nonprofits but other affordable housing groups. And now in my role at Sunflower Development Group as a new market tax credit advisor to local governments, CDFI banks, nonprofits, and for-profits. And so I'd love to share a little bit about the new market tax credit program and also about the partnership between a subsidiary of us, Sunflower Community Investments, and Network Kansas. So Network Kansas and Sunflower Community Development Group have formed a joint, what's called a community development entity, and we've applied for certification to as a rural community development entity. And a community development entity, or CDE, is essentially a group that is allowed to apply for the new market tax credit from the Treasury Department. We will invest 70%, if we are awarded, I should say, tax credits, we'll invest 70% in rural Kansas. And I should note, because this question came up recently, that rural Kansas is not the USDA designation of rural. It's literally outside of a metropolitan statistical area. So it's essentially the majority of, obviously, of the state would qualify as rural. The application will be announced in late July and early August. Actually, the awards were just announced for last round last week. And we believe, we're not sure yet, because the Treasury Department doesn't really like to show its cards. We believe it'll be due in September. And again, we believe the announcements of the applications will come out in July, just based on kind of the past history of the program. So as Steve and I and his team worked through our partnership, we wanted to come up with a mission to support as many businesses in the state of Kansas as possible, including nonprofits. So our impact statement is to invest in projects that increase health equity, community vibrancy, entrepreneurial activities, primarily in the rural communities. And our investments will be targeted toward community facilities, which is a pretty broad category. It could be daycares, it could be YMCAs, that's typical community facilities. Healthcare expansion, like critical access hospitals, Broadband access, we know this has been a huge topic as of late. Manufacturing, industrial, and especially to try to support operating business expansion, meaning existing businesses like manufacturing, industrial that are taking the next step to grow. And we do feel like the health, education, prosperity of our citizens is important. And so that's why we decided that, this is where we would direct our activities if, in fact, we were fortunate enough to receive a new market tax credit allocation for the state of Kansas. In order to apply for, to be a certified rural CDE, you need to have an advisory board that's reflective of the geographic area that we're serving. And so this is a list of folks that I'm sure many of you know, very well accomplished folks in the state of Kansas doing great work in their community. And so they will guide our investments if, in fact, we do secure a new market tax credit allocation. So the partnership is the parent company of the CDE that we have formed is Network Kansas. And Steve, I don't know if you want to take the lead or you want me to run through to talk about your organization.
Go ahead.
Steve?
I would, why don't you go ahead, because I think it kind of shows why you think, why this partnership exists and how it relates to the new market tax credits.
Great. So Steve and I have known each other for the past couple of years, and frankly, Sunflower Community Investments, we applied ourselves 2 years ago for an allocation of new market tax credits. And Sunflower Community Investments and Sunflower Community Development, we're a full service development firm that focuses on a lot of infill development and developing historic buildings in hard areas. So our joke is if it doesn't take 3 years to develop, then it's not worth our time. We don't do the easy stuff. And about 80% of everything we've done was in an eligible census tract. So we applied for an award, which is highly, highly competitive, exclusively for the state of Kansas. And we were close. We made it into the second round. However, being a developer and a new market tax credit advisor, we didn't have a track record of actually investing or making loans into Kansas. We were investing equity and we were securing new market tax credits for clients, but we weren't actually a lender, which is the majority of the CDEs these days are either community development entity investors or they're community development financial institutions, which is essentially a nonprofit bank designation, which invests in distressed areas. So Steve and I began talking, about his organization, and we've got to know each other, and it became clearer and clearer that if anyone was going to apply in the state of Kansas, which has never received an award for exclusively the state of Kansas using the new market tax credit program, it was going to be Network Kansas. And Network Kansas's reach is very broad. After working with him, we realized that they make about 100 loans a year across the landscape of Kansas, which I believe 88% of those would be considered in rural areas. And what they do is exactly what the new market tax credit is designed for. It's mezzanine, what we call mezzanine debt or gap financing. They provide the last 10%, up to 10% of a loan that's subordinated to a traditional bank, oftentimes, to be able to get the project to move forward. And frankly, that is exactly on a different scale, a larger scale, but that's exactly what the new market tax credit it also does. It's highly subordinated debt. It's the sale of tax credits, and Steve's group also sells state tax credits to help fund their revolving loan programs. And ultimately, the point of it is to support entrepreneurs in the state, to grow business, to support communities that have been overlooked oftentimes by other groups, and to create additional jobs in the rural landscape. And so, again, over the course of 2 years, it just became so clear that Network Kansas was well positioned, and if anyone's going to get an allocation, it's going to be because of the strong track record of Network Kansas. So we're super excited about working with Steve and his group and his team, and super impressed about how with what they've been able to accomplish over the course of the number of years that they've been around. And so what we do, and I touched on this, is so we're Sunflower Community Investments is a subsidiary of Sunflower Development Group, but we're a full-service real estate development and consulting firm. When I came to Sunflower 4 years ago, we started talking with people in the area about new market tax credits, and our state has largely been passed over, and I think the reason is there's just not that many banks or CDFIs in the state of Kansas. And so that lacks some institutional knowledge about the program. So I've been, as many of you may have seen presentations, traversing the state for the past number of years to talk to people about the program, to work with local groups, and to secure new markets. And so we've been successful at securing $90 million in new market tax credits over the past 4 years for clients. And again, those have ranged some nonprofit and some for-profit. And we're also experienced in rural development. I've spent a lot of my career working in the rural landscape, and I'm excited about it. When I worked at Travoy New Markets, the rural Native American CDE, I managed the CDE as well. So we have experience in managing CDEs, writing applications, and deployment of new market tax credits. And over the course of my career, I've closed roughly $250 million in new market tax credit transactions nationwide. So we really feel like the partnership is strong between Steve's and his team's network and our experience being able to deploy new markets. We really feel like we're at least well positioned to be competitive in this upcoming round. So what are we looking for today? Impact Kansas CDE. We're looking for projects right now to put in our application. And I'll get to this towards the end also in a little more detail. But the minimum total project size for a new market project typically is $5 million. And that's because the fixed costs associated with the transaction, don't always make, what's the terminology, is the juice worth the squeeze? There's a lot of complication to these projects. And so right around $5 million is probably the minimum where it starts to make sense to really go down the path of new market tax credits. I would say the average new market tax credit project is probably somewhere between 8 and 12 million, but there have been much larger projects, up to $100 million projects, which have utilized the new market tax credit program. The timeline, so we're applying for the upcoming round, which will be announced sometime in mid-2020. But we're looking for projects that, potentially could be closing or further down the road in that time frame. Again, we're going to commit to 70% rural as a minimum in terms of investment. And we're seeking healthcare expansion, broadband, education projects, especially things like tech schools. Again, community facilities, industrial, grocery stores. And I have community facilities twice here for some reason, so that's an error on my part. But these are the types of projects that we'll be looking to support, hopefully, if we get an allocation of tax credits. And as Steve and Nancy mentioned, Kansas has ranked right around 49th in terms of deployment. And to give you this compare and contrast, the state of Missouri, I should say the state of Kansas maybe has had roughly $150 million maybe of new market tax credit deals. The state of Missouri has over $1.5 billion of new market tax credit transactions. So there's something wrong, in my opinion, that that there's such a disparity between the two states next to each other. And we really feel like we need to access this program and get the support of our local government as well, and federal government, to say, hey, Kansas deserves its own allocation, so we don't have to go chase new market tax credits from regional groups that have them. We want an allocation for our state alone. So getting a little bit into what is the New Market Tax Credit Program. So it's managed by the Community Development Financial Institution, or CDFI fund, which is a program based out of the Treasury Department. Last week, they made an award of $3.5 billion in New Market Tax Credit allocation. There were, I believe, 279 CDEs or CDFIs that applied, and 73 received an award. So it is a very competitive program. Oftentimes, the CDEs receiving the awards are groups that have been around for 15 or 20 years applying, have a very, very long track record of deploying new market tax credits. Typically, I would say there's a number of new CDEs involved. Last year, or this year, I should say, there's only one new CDE on the list that was a brand new allocatee. The average award is $40 million in allocation. However, there are very few rural CDEs, and the designation of rural is important. It means that greater than 50% of the investments of a particular group have gone to a rural area over the past 5 years. So you have to demonstrate a track record. You can't just start a CDE and say we're rural. You have to demonstrate you have invested in the rural communities as a mission of your organization. And so there were 11 rural CDEs that received allocation. And it's important to note that there's a requirement by the Treasury that says a certain percentage of allocation has to go to rural America. And so the average award of the rural CDEs was actually $57 million. So it was $17 million higher than the average award of a regular CDE. And in fact, what I found out recently was in the original first award, there were only 9 rural CDEs that were designated that made it to that tier to be able to have enough points to get an allocation. And because of this minimum, they actually pulled 2 additional rural CDEs and that didn't make the cut and gave them $57 million. So, Impact Kansas CDE will be a very interesting candidate because A, we're in what's called an underserved state. We're one of 7 underserved states that designated by the Treasury Department that says we need to direct more allocation to these states. And CDEs will say, I'm going to serve some of my allocation to underserved states. But again, we have not, these are out of town allocatees. These are not Kansas-based allocatees. And some of them are great and they're great partners and they're good to work with, but it's harder to attract an out-of-state CDE to Kansas versus having one that'll take more time and patience to work with groups and commit allocation and possibly to a longer time frame than someone who's out of town because, we're local. And so that's important, and we're excited about that, and we think it gives us a little bit of an edge when we apply.
Chris, can I add something there?
Yeah, Steve, go for it.
I might just add that these new market tax credits are crazy complex and they're weird. I mean, Chris explained it to me 3 or 4 times, and we wouldn't be doing this without a partner like Sunflower because they're experts in this. But I really think that if we can start getting allocation, we can start building a system where infrastructure and projects across the state, we're kind of doing more planning for how these new market tax credits can work with local communities that fit into the distressed areas that Chris is going to talk about. But I think that, basically the allocations that Kansas is getting now is just an organization that got an allocation and can't find a project. And so they're really just doing it. They're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it because they can't find a project somewhere else. So I think if we can get an allocation, we can build a better system across the state to, build these projects that need to be done. And he's going to share some of those projects that have happened, but just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, Steve makes a really good point, and we've had this conversation before. It's like we've talked to a lot of bankers, and especially in Wichita, which has had a couple new markets deals, but not very many. And it's hard to get bankers interested unless you have your own allocation. It's hard to talk hypotheticals and have someone really dig into a project with a hypothetical without having, yes, this is just for this is a specific allocation for Kansas, and we have it. So let's talk about how we can partner with other banks that maybe are not familiar with the program. So we feel like it's super important to get one for our state. So getting back to the presentation, what is new markets? So it's a 39% federal tax, and I'm not going to get into like super detail. I've been accused by Steve oftentimes of getting in the weeds too much. I'm not going to do that today. Rightly so, because I nerd out on some of this stuff. But what it is a 39% tax credit that's realized over 7 years from an outside investor. So the investor on a $10 million allocation of new market tax credits, an investor will receive 3.9 million, or 39% of the 10 million, in the form of a tax credit, where they will apply that to their tax liability over a 7-year compliance period. And who are the investors? They're typically large, very large banks. So all the big ones. The largest in the country in terms of investment has been U.S. Bank, but Capital One, Chase, Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, they're all investing in this program, and they do it because they get CRA credit, but they also get instead of pay taxes, they get to offset their taxes and make a little money on the side, frankly, which is how tax credits work. And they're able to invest that equity into low-income communities. So the point of the program, and this was rolled out and approved during the Clinton administration, is really to direct private equity into distressed areas. And that's the whole point of the program, to help support development, redevelopment, provide services, or create jobs in those areas. Right now, the credit pricing is a little in flux because of the changes to the tax code a year ago. And so credit pricing is it's right around 82 is probably normal on the dollar. So they're gonna sell their tax credit, not for $1, but purchase their tax credit, the investors, for about 82 cents. 2 years ago, it was right about 86 cents. So it was a little bit better than it is today. But today's range is right around 82. So what everyone says is, well, what's the benefit to me, right? And the benefit is, depending on the CDE and their fee structure, a project can receive between 13 and 20% of an equity infusion into it. And when I say an equity infusion, the new market tax credit comes in as a soft loan that is interest only for that 7-year period, and then it's converted to equity at the end of the 7-year period. So essentially, on a $10 million project, if you could receive, let's say, $2 million, a $2 million soft loan, and at the end of the 7-year compliance period, you actually purchase that loan for $1,000, and then you can forgive the loan to yourself, which is essentially converting into equity to a project. So the point is, and how the program was created was, a lot of folks in areas didn't have 30% equity that a bank required in order to fund a project, because they wanted to only fund 70% and have the owner provide another 30%. And that was difficult. And so the new market tax credit came in and supplemented owner equity by 20%. So they could get, if the owner put in 10%, or the project sponsor put in 10%, the new market tax credit would make up the remainder of the 20 or the 30%, and then they can go find a traditional lender to lend into a project. So that was kind of the impetus of the program to some extent. So how and where can we access this program? This is one of the most important slides. Projects must be located in distressed or highly, and I should say, really it's highly distressed census tracts. And that means, a distressed census tract is 20% poverty. A highly distressed census tract is considered 30% poverty, or median family income of or 60% for highly distressed, or national unemployment 1.5 times the national average. Now for rural areas, you get a little bit of a benefit because a rural area can just be in the 20% poverty rate, the distress poverty rate. And if it's that and rural, it's automatically highly distressed. So every rural census tract is highly distressed. And again, the point was there wasn't enough new market tax credits flowing to rural areas because the concentration of these groups that get the awards, most of them were in urban areas. And so they don't travel out to Hayes or Dodge or wherever. They either wait to get phone calls a lot of times, or they just work locally. And so that was a concerted effort by the CFI fund to direct additional projects to rural areas. And you would think every rural area would qualify, and I'll get to the map in a second. It does not, unfortunately, because it's census tract based. And so here is a map of Kansas. The red areas are eligible census tracts. The yellow areas are the distressed, not highly distressed, but distressed census tracts. And so you can, and I should say that the one issue with this map is that it does not show a very obscure allowed rule, which is something called a high migration rural county. And I believe I may send that out. I know we sent it out. I think we sent the list out, Steve, through either CREDA or KDA, but there's a list of counties that have lost a certain number of population over the past 20 years. And that and their poverty rate is close, but not exactly 20%. And so the CDFI fund has said, we're going to allow for something, this group called high migration rural counties. So there's about 10 additional census tracts that are eligible that are not on the typical map that you see. And we'll get that list out to this group as well after the fact, because it is a lot of cities that people said, well, man, we don't qualify. Well, you actually do. So that's important. But this is the map. You can see there's some large swaths, some smaller swaths, but this is kind of the rural landscape. And there's some you got to kind of zoom in a little bit more in order to see, a smaller census tract that's eligible. So this is the famous new market tax credit structure. I'm not going to go really into detail with this, but this is how the loans and the equity from the new market tax credit investor flow through this kind of complicated structure, and then goes down to all these acronyms. I won't go into acronyms too, but it's a governmental program, so it's got to have tons of fun acronyms. But get through the new market tax credit structure to the project. And what on the bottom, there's something called the QualiC-B, which is Qualified Active Low Income Community Business. And that is basically the project. So if you have a potential project, contact me. I'll go through this in detail, but I'm not going to do it today. On new market tax credit deals, so the important question is oftentimes, well, so I have the tax credits, but what you also need is either a capital campaign or another lender or a loan source to be able to get a project done. So here are some kind of common lenders, or leverage lenders as we call them in the business. You can use conventional debt, which is bank debt. You can work with a CDFI. Sometimes it's owner equity or investor equity. We've used many types of bonds, geo bonds or IRBs. The easiest projects oftentimes are capital campaigns because there's not a lot of restrictions on those funds. And so you're able to leverage the new market tax credits using capital campaigns. TIF bridges, grants. We just did a USDA community facilities loan with new markets, and also USDA guaranteed loans are allowable through the program. So that is something that's new, that they changed legislation to be able to use USDA guaranteed loans through the new market tax credit structure, which is great. We're excited. We're super excited about that. So project impact. So this is what CDEs look for when they're looking and evaluating projects. So it's essentially free money. So, and my lights just went off because I wasn't moving in my office. There we go. This is what CDEs look for when they're evaluating projects. So CDEs get they get contacted all the time because developers or project sponsors are like, hey, we want free money, right? And so, but for the CDE, you want to be able to invest in the most impactful projects and be able to tell that story to the Treasury Department that, hey, look, if you've given me this super competitive, precious resource, I'm doing a lot of good with this allocation. That is a very important point, to the program. And so it's creating living wage jobs. Some CDEs that get awards have metrics that they associate with their allocation, and they promise that they'll create 5 jobs or 10 jobs per $1 million of allocation. So they invest $8 million in a project, they want to see a substantial number of jobs being created. Also assisting, minority, women-owned or low-income community businesses. Oftentimes, it's to help create below market rate leases for tenants. So an example of that would be industrial. We worked on a project that was kind of the pioneering building of an industrial center that wasn't maybe as attractive as some of the other places in the Kansas City area. And so they were able to reduce their cost of construction to provide a little bit below market rate leases to attract the first tenant. And now they're on their 5th phase, and I think they have 2 million square feet of industrial space. So super successful. That's exactly the point of the new market tax credit program. Also providing goods and services in low-income areas. So that could be grocery stores. It could be health. It could be critical access hospitals, helping to support the health and wellness of folks in low-income census tracts. Improved environmental sustainability, so some renewable energy projects have been done. Also environmental attributes of development like LEED certification. We just talked about pioneering developments. So this is the first building to show, hey, we can do this. Daycare centers are part of community facilities. Elderly care as well is something that has been a little bit harder to be able to get new markets into, but it's starting to be done now more and more. So we're excited about that. And also projects that support public-private partnerships. The last thing a CDE wants to do is invest in a project that the local government says we don't want. That does not fly in the community development world. And ultimately, this is a community development tool. So this is what kind of people look for in terms of good projects. So I'm going to get a little bit into Kansas projects. So we want to talk about Kansas there, right? Like, what types of projects have been funded using this tool? So this is one that I'm fortunately working on right now. I'm working as a consultant to the Unified Government of Wyandotte County. And they've been trying to, and when I was at LISC, I worked on this project. I think I've been working on this project for 7 years or 8 years. We've been trying to get a grocery store in downtown KCK for a really long time. And it's been a struggle for a lot of reasons. But we have now, are in the closing process, so we'll close next month on it's actually a 14,000 square foot grocery store now as we've gone through the development project. But the total project cost is $7 million. This is the Merck out of Lawrence, which is a co-op that started in the 70s and has been very successful. And we were able to secure $7 million of new market tax credits from Central Bank of Kansas City to help reduce the total project cost. This is 100% financed by the city of well, I should say the Unified Government through bonds, through property tax and TIF, some special asset fund that they have from the sale of a hotel that they owned, and then LISC is participating with some Healthy Futures finance funds in it as well. It's a great project. It includes demonstration kitchen, classroom space. They will go do public gardens in local schools. We are also applying for a grant from the Kansas Healthy Food Initiative. I didn't say that right, Steve. The Kansas Healthy Food Finance Initiative to help support an education coordinator. We are also using New Market Tax Credit dollars to help fund that as well, in addition to scholarships for people that are on SNAP and other governmental assistance will receive a free membership, and also receive scholarships to classes on how to cook, and especially how to cook with healthy food. And so we will open that up and give away, I think we have $15,000 to give away over the 7-year period to folks wanting to access classes that maybe don't have the means to be able to access those classes. So we're really excited about that. The total net benefit to the project from the New Market Tax Credit will be about $1.1 million. And again, that will close in, hopefully, knock on wood, in July of next year, but we're in the middle of closing. So super excited about that project. Oops, I don't know why that. This is one that I'm very excited about because I spent about 18 months working with these folks on and off. This is a pretty complicated project because it included USDA Community Facilities Funds and New Market Tax Credits, and it was only the 3rd project in the nation to access New Market Tax Credits and USDA Community Facility Funds. So we have a great USDA office in Kansas, and Sean Hastings, shout out to him, that he's really dug into the New Market Tax Credits to get this project over the hump. But it was 2 phases of expansion of the Rooks County Health Center. It was to include a nuclear medical suite, and then also an outpatient rehabilitation rehab center. And the total New Market Tax Credit allocation we secured was $8.2 million, which provided gross New Markets equity of $2.6 million. Again, it was a USDA CF loan of $7 million, and they had raised $1.5 million through a capital campaign. So this was, and this was actually the first time I met Steve was at the first meeting I had with Rooks County, giving them a presentation on New Market Tax Credits. And, because of just development in general, it took about 18 months to get it finally closed. But it wasn't necessarily because of New Market Tax Credits. It was just that sometimes projects take a little longer than you think, right? So we're super excited about this project. And the fact that also it was in Senator Moran's hometown. So that doesn't hurt in terms of support.
And I would like to add something there, Chris. And,
yeah.
And I think that probably the reason that New Market Tax Credits haven't been used in Kansas is they are mind-numbing complex. But the reason that we have decided to, partner with Chris on this is, number one, they know what they're doing. Number two, as you will see, this project and some of the others, I'm sure you're going to talk about Block 22,
yep.
These are projects that need to be done in Kansas. And quite frankly, this equity piece that the investors get is real money, and it's has a huge benefit. And it may be the thing that can, get more investment going that might be stumbling along the way.
Right. That's our hope. So this is one I did not work on, although we work a lot with the bank that invested in this. They're super experienced. It was Enterprise Bank and Trust. But this was a replacement of a 102-year-old YMCA with almost 17, with a 17,000 square foot facility. It supports 3,000 low-income people in terms of access to exercise, gym, pool, again, teaching kitchen, kids fitness. We all know YMCA, and they needed a replacement. And there's some great folks up in Atchison. Justin, shout out to him for working on this project. And $11 million in allocation, $10 million of allocation with the net benefit. I don't have it here, but the net benefit was roughly on this one, $2.2 million. So great. YMCA's really utilized this program across the country with a lot of their projects. Salina Fieldhouse. So this was a public-private partnership, or I should say a public partnership with some private financing, $11 million project, 4.5 with the city of Salina, some private fundraising, and then 2.7 million in equity from a group called Dakota's America, who is a rural CDE as well, out of South Dakota, who does fabulous work, and we've worked with them in the past and been around for a long time. But this is, something that people from all over the region are using for recreation and sports. So this is one that's near and dear to my heart because it was one of the most complex projects that I think I'd worked on, and I've worked on a lot of projects, but it was taking 4 buildings in Pittsburgh, and the development group is called the Vecino Group, who's our client, came in, and they had a vision with the university and the city to save 4 buildings that didn't have really a useful life in them. And there was a lot of vision behind this that said, hey, look, what we really need to do is access a number of these tax credit programs and make the downtown Main Street more vibrant in Pittsburgh. And so the Vecino Group, with its ties to Pittsburgh, started down this path to look at different buildings. And this is 100 units of student housing in 4 separate buildings at 4th and Broadway, which is the end of essentially their Main Street, which is 3/4 of a mile to the university. And the point was they wanted to bring more students downtown, to spend more money downtown and maybe help revitalize some of the other buildings as well. And so we went down a path of historic tax credits, new market tax credits, a grant from Pittsburgh State, a grant from the city of Pittsburgh. I think I said historic tax credit equity, and then a loan. So this was an $18 million project that, with all these sources of tax credits and equity and grants put together, the bank loan was only $4.5 million on an $18 million project, which is amazing. The university will buy this project at the end of the 7-year period for the amount of the debt. So they will literally buy an $18 million project for whatever the debt is on the project, which is tremendous. And they just didn't have the experience to go through these tax credit projects, so they worked with us and the development and Vecino Group to get it done. So I know that 2 restaurants are being built out right now. The hacker maker space, all the commercial stuff is in process, but all the student housing is open, and it's a super exciting project. So next time you're in Pittsburgh, go to Roots Coffee in the building and check it out, because it's a very, very interesting project. This was the first new market deal ever done in the state of Kansas, which was the children's campus of KCK, which is 72,000 square foot facility that provides early childhood education and research. They provide mental health, oral health, and family support services, largely supported by KU, with an $18 million project, with LISC actually being the allocatee that provided the new market tax credits. This is the corner of, right as you come off of Minnesota and KCK, is a very prominent building, which is across the street from what used to be the EPA building, but what is now the health, which is now KU had purchased the building for, I think it's health services. So that's a great, this was the first kind of pioneering new markets deal in the state of Kansas. So lastly, because I don't want to go too long and I want to at least open it up if there are questions, what do we need from everybody here? It's really, what we want to do is Steve and I and his team, we're putting together a pipeline of projects for the state of Kansas to put in our application for new market tax credits. So we need to demonstrate to the Treasury Department that Kansas has a need, that there is a clear need for this tool to be used. And the way that we do that is demonstrate it through all of you in your communities coming to us and talking to us about the projects that you potentially have that are over $5 million in Kansas. And we are not picky in terms of, we know it's community development. I talked about that grocery store that took 7 years. I've been working on that on and off to be able to get that deal done. We know that community development's hard, and it's hard for a reason. But worthwhile projects do get done. So we want to talk to you about projects that are in conceptual phase, that are in pre-development, or projects that are potentially imminent. Again, that maybe are not on that time frame that will happen this year. We still want to know about those projects, because those could have been eligible for new market tax credits if we would have had it, and would have helped soften the burden of the high cost of either development or finance. So we want you to reach out to us, and just, if you think you have a project, we'll evaluate whether it's in a eligible census tract. We'll talk to you about the project, and the amount of information that we're looking for is not onerous by any stretch of the imagination. So it's super important that we hear from you, and we're happy. I'm always happy to talk to people about potential projects. Greater than 5 million. I'll show you what we're looking for in the next slide. And all we're looking for is a very simple intake form first, after we have the initial conversation, and then we'll probably follow up with some additional questions. But we wanted to keep it simple, right? That's our motto, is like, sometimes just keep it as simple as possible. This is literally our initial intake form, which we can distribute to everybody. It's just a Word document that explains what we're looking for. And so contact information, an address, because we want to know if it's an eligible census tract, a brief summary of a project, if you know what your estimated costs are. Sometimes sources and uses are not available. We understand that, not a big deal. The impacts. So how is this going to impact your community? How many jobs do you think it may create or retain if it's something? I'm working on a mushroom farm project actually right now in Miami, and they're a family farm, and they need to compete with the big farms, and so they're investing in a bunch of technology to be able to save their family farm from being outcompeted from some big, large farm. So it's also jobs retained. We look at types of jobs created. Industrial manufacturing is kind of, the top example everyone gives, because you can give folks that maybe have lower skills or less education, they can make a living wage and a decent wage working in industrial manufacturing. So that's a very attractive projects overall. But they don't necessarily like, retail jobs are not exactly necessarily what everyone's looking for with new market tax credits, that people making $8 or $9 an hour, we'd love to commit to making at least a living wage. Average estimated salaries. And to say that, I should step back and say some jobs will be like that. Like grocery store jobs are inherently, less than other jobs, but they provide other community services. So come talk to us, and we're happy to walk you through a project.
Chris?
Yeah.
Chris, it's Nancy. So if I'm not mistaken, one of your last projects was a child care center, right?
The new market, the first KCK project was a child care center. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so those are going to be notoriously poorly paid. However, it's got a big economic impact, I assume.
Yeah. So what we look at is that is not necessarily providing. It's not just about job creation. Oftentimes, it's about what's the goods or services that you're providing to your community. And so childcare obviously is needed, especially if it's related to folks that are using governmental programs to help support and pay for childcare. We look for services. So what additional community benefit? It's not just about the job creation. There's a whole host of other things that we look at. It's about impact overall. So it's a really good point that it's not always about job creation. Goods and services, like healthcare is easy, right? You're providing all this really important healthcare, especially in the rural landscape for critical access hospitals or grocery stores and food deserts. And then, kind of a generic question, tell us about how you think your project's going to impact your community. And that's just more of an open-ended question because not all projects fit in these boxes. So we want to leave a kind of an open-ended question for someone just to talk about how that project can impact their community. At that, so this is our contact information, and please, don't be afraid to contact me. I am happy, and I'm not just saying this, I'm super happy to talk to anybody about their project, walk them through it, whether or not we believe it's, I can talk about whether we think it's a competitive project from the new market tax credit standpoint or not. And, happy just to talk through it. And again, we're looking for a pipeline of probably between 150 million and up in terms of pipeline projects that we'd like to put in our application to, again, demonstrate the need. When we apply, we'll probably apply for roughly $40 million of allocation. I don't know if we'll receive that much or if we'll receive an award, because again, it's super competitive, but we feel like, you know, Network Kansas and all the work that they've done really will provide a really compelling story to say, you know, while we maybe have not been making new market tax credit loans, Steve's group has been making a lot of loans and making huge impact with less money, frankly, overall.
Yeah, I might add that for the last month, we've been kind of looking at the application and started working on it. And I don't think I think the other pieces will be able to, you know, show competency. But quite frankly, the project list is what's going to be the key. It's going to be the make or break on us having the opportunity to get an allocation is the projects from you all, and that we can prove that Kansas, you know, needs these and needs an allocation.
Right. And
So,
we have a
Chris?
little bit of time, so I can answer questions, or Nancy, you let me know how you want to handle it.
Yeah, so there are a couple of questions in the chat box. Carl Garten is asking about the map. The red area is those that are eligible, correct?
Correct.
And then Travis, who I think is in Emporia, said, you mentioned there may be areas on the gray that are eligible, and I've made a note to ask you for that map when we send this out to everybody else.
Yeah, I can send out a list of, I've gone out and kind of looked at some of the census tracts and put together a spreadsheet of the counties and the census tract numbers that are eligible through the high migration rural county designation. And I'm happy to share that.
So Carl is asking, so the Salina Fieldhouse was done even though it was in the gray area?
So the map had changed with updated census data, and that may have been included in the previous census data. I know I had a very scary moment the day that we closed Rooks County, because they give you 12 months between the census tract change to the new map and the old map. And during like the last couple of weeks, someone said, well, this isn't an eligible new market tax credit area, and had a mini heart attack, and then said, no, I'm 100% sure that it was, but had to go back to the old data and show that it was in the, the eligible census tract. So they don't change frequently. They do change with new census data.
So Chris, can you see the chat box?
Oh, yep.
Bill Manis?
So designated as opportunity under the federal Opportunity Zone program. Op Zone program projects. So they're starting to trickle out a little bit. We followed the Opportunity Zone legislation and projects very, very closely. And yes, you can double dip. There's no requirement why you wouldn't be able to do that. I think that they probably pair fairly well together, because typically in Opportunity Zone projects, an equity investor is going to want to invest for typically a minimum of 10 years. And the new market, because that's where you get your tax benefit from OZs. And the new market tax credit program is a 7-year compliance. So you're going to have to invest a minimum already of 7 years if you're using new market tax credits. So waiting another 3 years before you potentially sell that asset seems like they would pair up well. And I know there are projects that are starting to happen using new markets and Opportunity Zone dollars, but we don't have any in the region that I'm aware of. Regional projects. So I guess it depends on what you mean by regional. Typically, projects have been either adjacent census tracts. There have been instances where health clinics have kind of chained together and done new markets projects because all of their clinics were in low-income census tracts. And so they were able to actually redo or build a number of health clinics using new markets, even if they're not in the same location. But typically projects are real estate projects that are fairly static, that are in an eligible census tract. So all of the, or the majority of all the assets would need to sit within that eligible census tract.
Other questions? As I'm sitting here, I'm thinking of a project I heard about in a grant workshop that would be early childhood center in Kansas City, Kansas, in an economically distressed area. So I'll be making sure that that person hears about this opportunity.
Yeah, we're excited. Yeah, KCK, you know, they're right in the middle of pretty highly distressed census tracts, almost all of them. And so they've utilized the program. We're working on the grocery store project right now, which we're excited about. And we're hoping that, you know, they've got a pipeline, I'm sure, of projects, especially with all the industrial stuff that's going on there. They are right to use the program in the future.
Any more questions? Boy, Chris and Steve both, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thanks for stepping up, Steve, to make that possible for everybody. We had 45 people on the call today, and I hope you'll all be thinking about others who might be able to benefit from this, to keep this conversation going. Just a reminder that we still do have our next Friday is our first Friday call. And our speaker is Brett Lance from the marketing. He's the marketing and development manager for the Technology Development Institute, which was formerly AMI, or the Advanced Manufacturing Institute here at K-State. And he's going to talk about how they can help with develop a prototype for small industry, and how and when can they help, and what should you do before we ask. So thanks everybody for joining us. I'll be sending out a link to the recording and the items that we promised you, including some census tract supplements and the PowerPoint data. And I hope you'll just flood Chris's phone with lots of questions and lots of projects.
Thank you, Nancy. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And so I like to leave you with a little thought for the day, and this is in honor of the Network Kansas and their board. From Arabi, it's a rather long quote that I'll put into the quote, but it ends with, it's something you've heard often, but it ends with, "We are the ones we've been waiting for." So thanks everybody for stepping up and making your communities great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thanks.